Buenas tardes, le habla Manuel Freud Ramos del periódico El Sol Latino. Hoy, 10 de marzo del 2021, le damos la bienvenida al episodio número 46 del podcast 413. Nos acompaña, como siempre, Natalia Muñoz, directora de noticias de Holyoke Media. Y hoy vamos a entrevistar a Aldo Lauria Santiago sobre el tema el Centro. Para los que no conocen el vocabulario, el Centro se refiere al Centro de Estudios Puertorriqueños o Center for Puerto Rican Studies en Hunter College. Cuando hablemos de centro, nos referimos a esa institución educativa, investigativa. Bueno, volvemos a la introducción de siempre. Les quiero aclarar que el libro de José Velázquez, Carmen Rivera y Andrés Torres, los que entrevistamos unas semanas atrás, nosotros no lo vendemos, pero lo puede conseguir en la editorial de Temple University o en Amazon. El libro ya está a la venta, pero nosotros no lo vendemos. Y los artículos de Harry Frankie Rivera, que fue el otro que entrevistamos, los puedes conseguir en su blog o se lo puede conseguir en Radio Rebelde, que es el otro sitio donde se publicó, o en la página de Facebook del Sol Latino. Están, en el caso del Sol Latino, solo está el de la estadidad, de la independencia vendrá el próximo mes. Las próximas entrevistas van a ser políticas, básicamente. La primera va a ser Margaret Randall y Mariana McDonald sobre Dominga Rescue the Flag, Dominga rescata la bandera, sobre una líder nacionalista que participó en la masacre de Ponce. Después vamos a tener a Alexis Oscar Tirado Rivera, ex profesor del recinto de Calley, que escribió un artículo sobre el Guayama de Luis Pález Matos y Luis Muñoz Marín, el encuentro en el 1917. Lo vamos a tener y terminamos este mes con Federico Suberbi Vélez, profesor de comunicaciones o periodismo, que acaba de sacar un nuevo libro coeditado con otras dos personas, de News Media in Puerto Rico, Journalism in Colonial Settings and Times of Crisis. Federico Suberbi Vélez publicó hace unos posiblemente 10 o 15 años atrás un excelente estudio sobre la llegada de Univisión a Puerto Rico y cuál fue el impacto en la industria de la televisión en Puerto Rico. Este es un nuevo libro y comenzaremos el próximo mes entrevistando a los líderes y organizadores del torneo de softball de Springfield, Old Timers, y el de Springfield, el de Holyoke. Ambas ligas empiezan a finales de abril, por lo tanto invitaremos a los organizadores de las dos ligas para tener algo diferente que no sea política. Bueno, pues hoy, como les dije, vamos a hablar sobre el Centro de Estudios Puertorriqueños. Es una institución que está basada en en Hunter College, y por años ha estado en crisis, algunas veces visibles, otras veces no visibles, y para darnos una lección sobre el Centro de Estudios Puertorriqueños, le damos la bienvenida a Aldo Lauria Santiago, el profesor de Rogers University. Aldo, y esto lo cortamos, la bio tuya no la voy a mencionar ahora, pero va a estar en la página cuando subamos el video. Pues bueno, Aldo, bienvenido.
¿Qué tal? Mucho gusto. Gracias por la invitación a Natalia y a Manuel. Good to be here.
Yeah, okay. Let's begin with Centro 101. ¿Qué es el centro? What is the center?
Mira, el centro, voy a cambiar de inglés a español
Está bien, ok, no
y
problem.
viceversa, así que el centro fue fundado como un centro de apoyo a los departamentos de estudios puertorriqueños que fueron creados a finales de los 60 y early 70s, ¿verdad? En el sistema universitario de la ciudad de Nueva York, que son varios, un sistema grande, son varios campuses. Entonces, en esa época los estudiantes se movilizaron para pedir estudios puertorriqueños dentro de, creo que tal vez 4 campuses. Y produjeron unos programas, algunos fueron departamentos, otros se quedaron como programas. Eh, y entonces el centro se inventó como un centro de investigaciones y de apoyo a la enseñanza de esos departamentos para promover la investigación especialmente. Todo lo que tuviera que ver con la diáspora puertorriqueña, especialmente obviamente en Nueva York, y también incluyendo todo lo que tenga que ver con Puerto Rico. Entonces, el primer director, Frank Bonilla, que estuvo bastante tiempo en la dirección, desarrolló programas de investigación y siempre se mantienen otras líneas de trabajo como presentaciones públicas y talleres para maestros y presentaciones de los investigadores en otros contextos como cualquier invitación que tuviesen. Y eventualmente también se produce una biblioteca y eventualmente también se produce un archivo que es una de las joyas de la cultura puertorriqueña anywhere, en la isla o acá, ¿verdad? Ahí pasan miles y miles de investigadores a usar esa colección. Eh, Podemos hablar un poco más de eso si quieres. Entonces, el plan era tener investigadores y promover programas en diálogo con la comunidad, que es un principio muy importante de la ética y la política de la fundación de Puerto Rican Studies en esa época, porque es una institución, digamos, unos programas que salen de la política estudiantil y de la política social de los puertorriqueños. Y en diálogo también con procesos paralelos, tal vez un poquito más avanzados en el tiempo, de los mexicano-americanos, los chicanos en el Southwest, en California especialmente, en diálogo con un proceso parecido al de ellos, para lograr representación en la academia y promover investigaciones sobre Puerto Rico y puertorriqueños donde fuese, ¿verdad? El centro montó líneas de investigación sobre historia, de historia laboral, historia de las mujeres en la industria de la aguja, historia radical de los movimientos radicales puertorriqueños, historia del nacionalismo. Trató de eh, entender por qué los puertorriqueños emigraron en números grandes. Trató de entender la comunidad que existía en Nueva York antes de la migración de los años 50. Eh, Empezaron un boletín que se convirtió en revista y es la principal revista ahora, muy prestigiosa y muy bien manejada de estudios puertorriqueños, con un repertorio extraordinario de investigaciones publicadas. Ahora que comparado con hace 50 años, pues hay muchos más investigadores que trabajan un infinito número de temas, ¿verdad? Eso es el centro. Entonces, ha crecido y también relativo a lo que era, pues se le han puesto límites cada vez que hay una crisis en CUNY. Pierden gente, pierden dinero y siempre ha sido una lucha grande del director que fuese para asegurar más fondos y a
Perdona
veces
que
para...
te,
Sí,
perdóname,
sí,
perdóname
dígame.
que te interrumpa. Eso que acabas de decir,
¿Mm?
¿cómo es posible que el centro tenga que luchar por un presupuesto? Why isn't that
Exactamente,
seen as one of the
exactamente.
crown jewels of CUNY?
Absolutely. It's a thing that is, when you put it especially that way, how can this be? We know the specifics, we know the stories, we know what happened 10 years ago, whatever. But when you zoom out, you say, what the heck is going on here? How can it be that Centro, which is the eminent research institution for Puerto Ricans, a jewel, over years You can criticize whatever you didn't like, whatever this director didn't do. There's been mistakes, whatever. But institutionally speaking, and in the record of production, it's super important institution. Nothing like it. How can it be insecure and subjected to the politics of a college president that does not have Centro's best interests in her mind, right? And in her practice, right? And there's been times when Centro had luck because people within CUNY and within city government that knew what it was like, what it was, the value of it, helped it out, right? With additional funds. But it was insecure funding, subjected to, you know, support from people who knew, as opposed to a solid institutional foundation. And I mean, to some extent, our community maybe should have applied more pressure systematically over the years, right? But the critical question here is that the defender of the Centro is the director, and we need to defend the integrity of the process of selection of that director from a setup, frankly, that doesn't seem to be doing that right now, right? The Centro exists within Hunter College.
Yep.
And it didn't used to. It was in John Jay College, and in goal and spirit, it could be anywhere within CUNY. It could be independent. It could have had its own endowment. And therefore the president has some role in determining this transition, as well as the previous one, in which Elwin and other people, including myself, were finalists for that position, right? Well, when in the 13 years ago, right? Yes, Manuel.
Yeah, do the El Centro has a state line of funding or no?
No.
No.
No. It's a very complicated budgeting thing.
Okay.
Where most of the lines are insecure, they're not permanent. They can be withdrawn. There's a lot of internal accounting maneuvers, like counting the salary from, let's say, the new director from the existing budget and not from wherever she or he was getting paid. It's, as we know, she's been appointed for 2 years, which is a kind of a shockingly long interim directorship, and with no clause about being able to run against others from the position of the interim positionship, which is very strange. To not do a national search now with an interim position that is typically from within, somebody that is there already, that can hold the fort for 3 or 6 months, that doesn't bring an agenda of their own, that just waits for the stakeholders to put together a process. And there's not been a word about that process. Usually in Centros, the ethic of the Centro was that the community and the staff and the students and the scholars within and outside CUNY had a voice in discussing, debating, and sometimes fighting out over the transition. And people with records of investment would then be contenders, right? And it's a competition, right? Of people with ideas, plans, projects, transparent to some extent, right? And the demand to the president in other periods sometimes conflicted over when Frank Bonilla quit. There was a similar conflict when Frank Bonilla retired, that CUNY presidents have their own agenda, right? And we have to be guardians of that, against that, because this Centro is ours, right? Centro belongs to the Puerto Rican community of New York. They fought for it, and of the larger Puerto Rican diaspora.
So, as you just said, the president of these colleges, these higher education systems, these are a lot of times they're political appointments. So, if not always. So, what do you think was the void, if there was one, in El Centro, that then politics came in and then there's this long-term interim appointment made?
I don't know. I think the fear has been that the president wants to impose somebody or has imposed somebody that she feels will accept the cuts and the limitations that she would like to impose on Centro. That's a fear, and there's some evidence of that, how the procedure has how it has moved, right? There was the expectation that because a former director of Centro is now the chancellor of CUNY, that he would be more careful about this process. And the petition that I organized was directed at him, as well as the president of Hunter, to ask for transparency and community involvement and involvement of scholars and a discussion and so forth. And he basically said yes, but no.
Right. We're
I mean,
about...
they appointed an interim director for apparently up to 2 years. That, unlike in other scenarios, an interim director that is talking about her agenda and her plans and her goals, which doesn't sound like an interim director to me in that sense either, right? And he didn't provide any additional information, let's say, on how to protect Centro and how Centro resources will be protected from ongoing cuts within CUNY, right? That frankly, Centro should be, as far as we're concerned, protected and protected from, right?
We're speaking, of course, of Felix Matos Rodriguez, who's the chancellor of the CUNY, City University of New York. And so it also seems unfair to the interim director to say you have 2 years. I mean, even presidents of the United States get 4 years. 2 years it seems too long for interim.
Yeah.
And if it's going to become a permanent position, it seems too short to really show what you can do.
And the demand has been, and I think lots and lots of people agree with this, of transparent search, competition among many, many qualified scholars out there, from within CUNY and outside of CUNY, men and women of varying ages, right, that could compete for this position and put forward their ideas and their goals for how Centro will continue doing what Centro's been doing under Edwin Melendez with the accomplishments that he has, or change some of the stuff that they might not like. We have not heard about that, right? And a 2-year interim position is indeed not really an interim position.
Right.
I mean, and might as well say that, right?
Yeah, definitely. I visited El Centro a few years ago, and of course was just impressed with the work that they had been doing, the work that they were doing. And I used to run a small newspaper out here in Western Massachusetts, and I thought, oh, one day I'm going to send my copies of the paper, paper to be at El Centro, because these, again, different Puerto Rican voices, what, for history's sake, what did we do while we were here? How did we contribute? The many ways in which we contributed. And now it feels, I don't know if it's going to be safe there.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a little bit of a feeling of fear and disappointment that I've sensed from many, many people, that we'll lose something extremely valuable as a certainty, as a sure thing. And I've been in touch with Centro since I was in college, and my dad worked at Centro. My dad was one of Frank Bonillas's advisors and confidants and so forth. And I have seen the ups and downs, many directors, many products, the archive, the poster collection, the Jesus Colon work, the garment workers, the linguistic work, the work on women's history, the collaborations with Puerto Rican scholars on the island, right? And I mean, this is what motivated the petition that I kind of called on 20 colleagues, not randomly, but so who can I think of right now? Let's write a petition and get this out there. And we got I don't know, 2,000 signatures in just like 2 weeks. And this, to some extent, it helped push the community to mobilize. And there's been a group that's been meeting, originating in Brooklyn College, discussing demands around similar lines of what is expected. And there's been some turmoil in there as well. But
I'm so surprised
Okay.
that Felix has pretty much no ha dicho ni esta boca es mía. I served with him on a council put together by the former governor of Puerto Rico, Sila Calderon. It's called like the Diaspora Council. There were other people, other Puerto Rican leaders. And it seems to me that he knows just as much of us three know. This is a vital,
of course,
urgency and importance, and say and do something constructive immediately.
Yes. And maybe even, well, whatever. I am in no position to really tell him what to do, but you're right. I mean, we would have expected different kinds of dialogue, or with whoever, with varied people, many possibilities there, right?
Well, I'm not even in New York, and I expect respect from Cooney, from the el liderato ahí, because I'm a Puerto Rican here in Western Massachusetts. We look to the north, to the south. O sea, there's Puerto Rico y los New York. It's always been like that.
And also, whereas Edwin Melendez's letter of renuncia might have caught many people by surprise because they're not listening in or whatever. I wasn't surprised. And I've had many conversations with people around Centro for years. I knew that I've worked very closely with them on different projects. And I've also been a critic of many of the things that have happened there. So this is not a question of being buddies or being, allies. This is all for protection and defense and the development of Centro projects. I knew that there have been issues accumulating until he just gave up, right? And basically it's forced. It's a forced process. There could have been a scenario in which he'd be supported with what he needs, and he wouldn't be quitting. He'd be lasting another year or two, whatever, right? So it's pretty clear that it's under duress in a not you're fired sort of way, but an equivalent.
No,
of like,
es una traición. Es una
traición.
Yep. That's no way of treating.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And of course he's had to be careful because he was still the director. He probably couldn't speak publicly about things, because he serves at her pleasure in a sense, right? And he probably still can't, and maybe he won't, because it's a hard process to deal with these things anyway. But and it doesn't matter what we think about his record, whether you think it's really good, not so good, critical of it. That's not what's at stake here. What's at stake here is the future. Yeah, it's a Centro, absolutely.
Oye, Aldo, what is the reaction of the Puerto Rican politician in New York City about this?
Listen, one of the things is I think our community is in a post-maturity moment. That there is there's more, but there's no center. You know what I mean? It used to be that there was not so many, there were more than before, but they had to talk to each other. There was a center, so to speak. Now, perhaps because of, I don't know, age, demographics, COVID, post-Maria, I don't know, aging, younger people are not so involved. I have not, or because of the Trump era, Trump elections, I mean, I don't get a sense that there's any attention being paid. And the people that I've talked to don't have a sense that any attention would be paid, right?
Okay.
And there's been some controversies. I mean, this is the thing: when the political community becomes big enough and successful enough, they stop agreeing about things, right? And Edwin, I'll tell you this: Edwin had issues with the expectation by certain circles in the community that Centro come out, not he personally, but Centro, something having to do with the supporting the former political prisoner in the parade.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, anybody would know that that kind of visible, vulnerable political, I mean, educational institution can't come out and do that. And funds were cut from the city council because of that to Centro, which is one of those varied lines of funding,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's been some additional monies coming in to enhance Centro. One was from Central CUNY administration, had an ally there, right? And he's not there anymore. Another one has been city council that has money to give to projects and to these research centers. And it was a punitive move by a politician, you know. So right now, they're not showing up.
Comparing El Centro with the other two research institutions, Dominican Studies and Mexican.
And Haitian also.
Oh, the Haitian.
Yeah, there's another one, yeah.
They have the same problem? Or because they are new, they're getting better?
I don't know. I don't know enough about their internal functioning. I know, for example, that with the Mexican Studies program, like their student fellowships come from the consulate. I think there's, you know, that kind of thing. So there's different forms of funding, but none of them have had the scale or success or life of the Centro. And the closest in that sense is the Dominican Studies, where they actually have a significant archive and library and so forth. And they have, you know, research people who come through, but they've never had as many staff or as many programs. Centro had many programs. They had an exchange program with the UPR, which they killed off, where scholars and grad students from Puerto Rico would come spend a year or semester in New York. They never returned the funding for that. They've had many different kinds of programs. So in that sense, Centro has a kind of a more successful trajectory, but never secure. And by the way, there is some, you know, some discussion that should be had about what's the ideal model. You know, Centro should have had its own foundation funding of its own, right? The donations of our community who are millionaires to provide whatever Centro needed, and also give them leverage with CUNY and with the administration, right? So that's something that is unfulfilled from our community as well, right? That those pieces have not come together the way that it comes together for other institutions that are similar in the academic world, right?
But perhaps that's due to what you said a little bit ago when I was asking about what void was there. The reasons an older population, where's the center of leadership? It's been dispersed. Those are vulnerabilities that then politicians can come in and take advantage of.
Yeah.
And to our peril.
Yeah. But
not to blame the Puerto Rican community.
Yeah. I mean, from a very plain talking sort of way, we could think that at every level, city council, perhaps even more local, all the way up, there's many Puerto Rican politicians who would claim an interest in their history being through El Centro, right? The documented and archived, and you know, in fact, many of them show up to read El Diario La Prensa on microfilm, you know, when they're looking for something, right? Which is in the library, right? But it's not coalescing right now. And it could be the COVID context, exhaustion of people, fear, you know, whatever. That probably has a lot to do with it. But on the other hand, you know, I'm a little disappointed that with the successes represented through multiple CUNY presidents that are Latino and the CUNY chancellor that is a former director of Centro, that this outcome has yet to be seen, if that it's even the formal process of searching for a director doesn't seem to be. There's something very strange going on.
Well, it is really strange because I mean,
Yeah.
there's also when we think of Puerto Rico is in a very vulnerable position, has been ever since that junta fiscal was appointed
Yeah.
by the Obama administration. Este, and so then we have these problems in Puerto Rico where you can vote for governor, but it doesn't matter really because it's the fiscal control board that says what you can do. Este, and then we have this problem with El Centro. So it seems like it's not just it's our island and it's also our Centro.
Yeah. And the Centro played an important role in mobilizing resources and people and contact and helping others that wanted to organize all sorts of responses to Maria. And also in general to the fiscal crisis and the economic crisis, but the emergency of Maria. And that's archived on their website, and that's archived in many sources. There's no disputing that. So in a sense, it is a critical, also Centro's engaged with migration to Florida. And maybe one day there'll be a research center in Florida, and that's fantastic, right? But they have not, been New York chauvinists, so to speak, that we only look at New York. So it's central to the community that's the old diaspora and the new diaspora, right? Wherever they might be. So,
yeah. Aldo, in general term, in academia, probably in the last 10 years, there is a movement to put all together in ethnic studies. Do you think that that's the final chapter of the Puerto Rican studies or Centro?
That's definitely involved here. What's not transparent is how much that is going on, including by people that, they're not academics from this field, but they should know better, even though they're not specialists, to support that sort of move for something like Centro. Ethnic studies makes a lot of sense in many different kinds of academic or scholarly or even teaching discussions, but Centro, it has a mission. It's Puerto Ricanness, period, right? And it can be and has been in dialogue with many pieces along the way, right? With Afro-Latinidad, with Cubanos, with Dominicanos, with all sorts of things, and maybe should have been with more, but that's besides the point. The point is that its mission is centrally one particular national origin / colonial / ethnic / racialized group, and it's us, right? When I interviewed for the position at Centro 13 years ago, just like Edwin did, the president, Jennifer Rabb, asked me in a defensive tone, but why do we need all these different ethnic group institutes? In a job interview to be director of one such institute, okay? There is definitely pressure, and it could come from anywhere. It could come from any justification. Ethnic studies is just an easy one that makes it sound pretty to merge and cut for other reasons. And that's happened to some of the departments and programs within CUNY, right? The academic units, the teaching units. Over the years, right? To the point where some of them virtually disappeared, like the one in City College, right?
Given all the silence from Felix and others, it seems to me, I wonder if this interim director the goal is to dismantle El Centro. And you got 2 years to dismantle. And nobody's saying anything. Felix, don't say anything. Yeah.
It would seem that maybe she didn't have a clue, or I don't know, right? Because none of,
Well, who takes on an interim position for 2 years? If it's not somebody, it's only for 2 years. Well, what's at the end of 2 years? And I'm just thinking, as you're speaking about all these, I'm thinking, could it be that the reason it's interim is because it's not permanent? Literally,
directly named by a president that is known to not have much love for Centro and how much love she has for Centro, we'll see through the actions. But Centro has survived under Hunter despite these things. They're not great. For a director, I've had many conversations with Melendez about feeling that the ability to do the projects is temporary, right? We're gonna do this and then it's gonna be over. And Centro has been getting NEH funding for multimedia projects. I mean, Centro has, the people don't know half of what Centro has been doing, in part because they don't visit the website, they don't talk to the staff and so forth. But the CUNY should be embarrassed that one of its most successful research centers, period, right, including the ones at the Graduate Center, which is one of the most undiverse CUNY worlds, right, including very few Puerto Ricans and Latinos in that context participating there, right? Centro ranks with any competitor as a quality place, right, in terms of production. This director, previous directors, however you want to slice and dice it, right? We should be demanding the Centro budget be doubled. I mean, that's not in the it's what it should be, right? So, and to some extent, it's even more important now with what's going on in the island, looking forward to 10 or 20 years, right? Looking forward to the dispersion of Puerto Rican diasporas, looking forward to the crisis of educational institutions in Puerto Rico itself, the UPR, right? The loss of funding for faculty and no hiring, and people retire and they're not replaced, and the history of Puerto Rico part keeps shrinking, the number of professors doing research. The hostility in Florida, right? Probably they won't have a research center there. I mean, I hope so, right? But it's Florida, right? I don't know. It makes us value the tradition of Centro even more. And there it is.
Oye, Aldo, one of the best strategy of Edwin Melendez was to connect El Centro with the Puerto Rican business world. What role has the Puerto Rican business leadership with El Centro now that it's a problem?
I remember a few years ago when Edwin began a program. He asked me to do something for it. I don't remember what it was. Suggest names, I think is what it was, to research names of business owners. 500 Puerto Ricans, and they did an event. They registered their names. They cultivated some collections from them into the archive. It was a celebratory thing, but part of it was oriented towards developing fundraising, right? And I'm not sure what happened, if that part didn't work, or if Edwin was too busy to then pursue, to keep pursuing that. There is no full-time fundraiser position at Centro. They'd be hard-pressed to have that. It is a weakness in general of the Centro trajectory over many directors that they've not been able to try to build an endowment funding. But in other contexts and in other communities, it's the business leaders that show up with a check. Right? I mean, because they want the visibility, they want the recognition, they want their name on the, such and such room in the archive is named after, whatever. It certainly won't be named after Goya because they haven't given any funding. But so as a community, it's a weak spot in, that there isn't this complex relationship with businesses and rich people that give money, including, all the pop artists and,
And my thought is this, because I talked with Jorge Duani a long time ago when he came to UMass We talk about the relationship between the community, Cuban community, and the Cuban Institute, Cuban Cultural Center. They put money.
Yeah,
millions.
Absolutely. Yeah.
In the case of Puerto Rican, it's not.
No, it's not
so visible.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm not sure if it's that nobody's asked, or if it's a sociological thing about the wealthy Puerto Ricans and their, I don't know, their choices, or they don't see it as important. I remember thinking about this when I was running for the rector, that had to be one of the 5 or 6 priorities. And I also remember thinking exactly about J-Lo and like, who's gonna call J-Lo? I'm not good at that. I'm just not gonna be good at that. I'm gonna be the guy that hires somebody to that position to do that work, because I will not be good at that, right? Either the J-Lo version or the lawyers, or Wall Street types. Right. I mean, maybe there's a little bit of that, the kind of incongruence between an academic world but it's not, what we're doing is not rocket science. You can see it on any Puerto Rican that goes to the website of any level of education, any background, will find something there that they'll say, yeah, this is valuable, right? The archive has digitized thousands of items and in oral histories, and that's all there to be clicked on, right? Just that alone, etc.